The Invisible Son. How I turned family abandonment into strength and rebuilt my life from scratch. I'll never forget the feeling of that night when I threw myself onto the old mattress on the floor of my room, alone, and felt like the whole world was against me. It was a mixture of anger and helplessness that burned in my chest, as if every breath was labored. I was 20 years old, studying at a public college at night, and working 2 jobs during the day, just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my siblings received everything from my father and mother, as if they were golden children. Jonas had a new car, Raquel lived in an apartment they paid for, and Anna, the youngest, received gifts and trips effortlessly. I, the middle child, lived on the edge, in debt, eating instant noodles to survive. The feeling of abandonment wasn't just emotional, it was physical. My stomach ached, my head throbbed, and my hands trembled. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that life would get better. But with each passing day, the feeling of invisibility became unbearable. I remember screaming at myself in the dark, wondering why I was always left out, why I was never a priority. This pain made me realize I needed to change something, that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of my brothers. I needed to prove to myself that I could survive and build something of my own, even if no one believed in me. My name is Lucas. I'm 32 years old today, and I'm telling this with the clarity that only time can provide. I grew up in a family that seemed perfect on the surface. A comfortable home, successful parents, happy and well cared for siblings. But inside my home, the reality was cruel. My parents, Jacqueline and Luis, gave disproportionate attention and money to my older siblings and my younger sister. I was constantly reminded that I needed to make it on my own because I was more independent. This justification sounded like disguised abandonment. While they received everything, I had to work to pay for transportation, food, rent, and to study. I asked for help repeatedly, but the answers varied between "you need to learn to grow up" or "you don't need anything, you're strong." I didn't want luxury. I only wanted the bare minimum conditions for a decent life, and this glaring difference began to erode my self-esteem. I felt invisible, unworthy of love or attention. The feeling of inferiority accompanied me constantly, making me anxious, irritable, and afraid of failure. Growing up in this environment taught me too early that justice and care within the family do not always exist. For years, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, even when I came home exhausted after working 12 hours and still had to study. While my brothers traveled, received expensive gifts, and attended private colleges, I shared a tiny room with 3 other people in a shared apartment, paying rent late and eating improvised meals. I told myself I needed nothing, but that was a lie. I needed to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized. With each ignored request for help, I felt a pang of pain that turned into anger. I tried not to cry, but tears escaped secretly in the bathroom. I wanted to be strong, but my strength was draining, and all of this eroded my physical and emotional health. Gastritis, insomnia, and anxiety became part of my routine. I was trapped in a cycle of silent suffering, trying to balance survival with dignity. But even in this chaos, something inside me began to boil. I knew I had to react, that I could not allow myself to be defined by anyone but myself. The seed of change began to germinate in that deep pain. The breaking point came during a family dinner. My parents announced, smiling, that they had bought Jonas another car. My blood boiled. I asked if they had any idea how I was living, if they remembered my debts, the times I went without dinner, the daily effort I made just to get by. Their silence was deafening. Then came the justifications. Every child has their own needs and you're independent. You don't need anything. I felt my face burn with anger. For the first time, I said everything I'd been holding back for years. I called out hypocrisy, denounced the favoritism, and said they were raising irresponsible children and leaving a broken son behind. I left crying, but with a strange sense of relief. Finally, I had put my feelings into words. Nothing changed the next day, but it was the beginning of my decision to change my own life, regardless of who believed me or not. After that dinner, the silence and distance became even more intense. My brothers called me ungrateful. My parents were hurt. I spent months without speaking to anyone in my family, working like crazy to pay off debts and studying to exhaustion. One day, I fainted on the bus from exhaustion and hunger. I remembered the feeling of abandonment that had haunted me since childhood. Many times I thought about giving up everything, disappearing and starting over, far from everyone. I was only 22, but exhaustion made me feel 80. Yet even amidst this pain, something began to shift within me. I realized I could no longer live as the forgotten son. I needed to fight back. I needed to build my life. I needed to find my dignity and independence. The decision wasn't easy, but in that moment, lying on the mattress on the floor of my room, I promised myself that I would no longer be defined by abandonment, inequality, or favoritism. I needed to take charge of my own story. The turning point began unexpectedly. A co-worker recommended me for an internship in the field I was studying, better paid and with room for advancement. I remember the mix of hope and fear I felt. What if I wasn't good enough? I spent entire nights practicing for the interview, rehearsing my answers, thinking about my worn-out clothes, the looks I would receive. On the day of the selection, my hands were shaking and my stomach felt like it was spinning. When I got the job, I cried alone in the bathroom at work, relieved, scared, and happy all at once. For the first time, I felt like something was working, that I might have a chance to start over. The salary was still low, but it finally allowed me to pay off some debts and buy decent food. And most importantly, it gave me a sense of dignity I had never experienced. There I began to realize that I needed to build my life without expecting anything from anyone, not my parents or my siblings. If I wanted to grow, I had to depend solely on myself. This decision seemed small, but it was monumental for someone who had spent years being invisible. From that moment on, I began to see possibilities where before there had been only despair. Every small step, every minimal achievement became fuel to keep going. The journey, of course, wasn't easy. I still felt deep anger at everything my brothers had received, and I hadn't. I still cried alone when I remembered the injustices. But the difference now was that I had a goal. I started studying finance, taking notes, learning to organize the little I had. Every bill paid was a victory, every decent meal an achievement. I made mistakes, overspent sometimes, despaired when the accounts didn't add up, but I also learned to forgive myself. I discovered that my anger could be fuel, not just poison. If no one was going to give me anything, I would give myself. This was the first concrete lesson in independence I learned. I didn't depend on anyone's validation, only my own. With each step I took, I felt like I was building something solid, however small. It was the beginning of a slow but steady transformation. My victories began to multiply. I paid off all my credit card debt, paid off my overdue rent, and even bought myself a new bed, all without needing anyone's help. Lying in that bed and feeling like I had achieved something with my effort was an overwhelming emotion. At 24, I landed my first full-time job in the field I'd always wanted. I was still the forgotten son, but I was finally proud of my own journey. I knew my brothers didn't understand the value of that, because they'd never had to achieve anything. But I did. Every effort, every sleepless night, every silent tear had taught me something no amount of money could buy: resilience, discipline, and dignity. I began to realize that, even with all the emotional wounds, I could rebuild myself. Years later, life took an unexpected turn. My father lost his job. Suddenly, all the money that supported Jonas, Raquel, and Anna disappeared. They began to experience the financial insecurity I had felt for years, and suddenly they were calling me for help. My initial anger wanted to speak louder, "Now you know what it's like." But I didn't want to repeat the cycle of pain and abandonment. I could help them, but it wouldn't be free, and it wouldn't be their way. I needed to teach them what I'd learned in practice, to show them that responsibility comes with privilege, that receiving without effort isn't enough. So I decided to help them, but in my own way. I didn't hand over money without explanation. I sat down with each of them, showing them how to organize debts, negotiate rent, cut unnecessary expenses, and plan for the future. They resisted at first, wanting a quick, magical solution, but I knew better. I was applying years of learning, every trial and error that allowed me to finally achieve independence. Little by little, they began to understand that it took effort, planning, and discipline. I didn't become the family's savior, but I managed to teach them something valuable. And to my surprise, it brought peace. I didn't depend on approval or gratitude. I was at peace, not becoming bitter. My greatest victory so far was internal. I had survived without losing my dignity, even as the forgotten son. Reconnecting with my parents was undoubtedly even harder than helping my siblings. I was filled with hurt and fear of getting hurt again. I started slowly, with small text messages and short meetings, without expectations. My mother cried when we spoke, admitting she'd never realized how much they'd hurt me. I didn't have ready answers, nor did I want to. Sometimes I just listened, other times I exploded, breaking down over years of accumulated pain, over every night I cried alone. Every tear that flowed during the conversation was liberating, because finally my pain was acknowledged. It didn't erase what happened, but it validated my experience and made me realize I didn't have to carry it all alone. This gave me an unprecedented sense of relief, something I hadn't felt in years. My father took longer to accept that he had failed. Always proud, always convinced he was right, life had to confront him. After losing his job and seeing my brothers in despair, he finally admitted he had made a mistake. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was sincere. For me, that was enough. Not because I needed his approval, but because finally he saw reality. However crooked the gesture, it represented a change. For the first time, I felt that the pain I had carried for years was beginning to find some kind of resolution. It didn't erase my suffering, but it allowed me to breathe without so much weight on my chest. I learned that acknowledgement, even belated and imperfect, can be enough to begin healing. The greatest victory I achieved, however, was internal. I learned to see myself as someone of value, regardless of how my family treated me. I learned to set boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to trust my own strength. I'm no longer that boy who cried in secret and felt ashamed of existing. Today, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. I still have friction and open wounds, but I no longer live trying to prove my worth to anyone. Life has taught me that my emotional autonomy is worth more than any external recognition. If I could speak to 20-year-old Lucas, I'd say, it's going to hurt a lot, but you'll survive. No matter how unfair or burdensome it may seem, you'll be able to take the first steps. Don't expect approval, money, or love from those who don't offer them. Build your life step by step and discover that every effort you make has value. The journey is slow, painful, and full of obstacles, but the reward isn't just financial or material. It's the dignity of knowing you don't depend on anyone to feel worthy and capable. I'm still in the process of rebuilding. I'm not a millionaire, I don't live a perfect life, but I have something that's worth more. Peace, autonomy, and the certainty that I can rise again even after suffering. Every decision I've made to put myself on the path to independence has strengthened me and taught me that pain doesn't have to be eternal. Life goes on, and with each challenge I face, I remember that I've survived much more than I imagined and that I can handle anything that comes my way. The greatest lesson is that overcoming doesn't eliminate the wounds, but it gives me the strength to walk even while carrying them. For many years, my body carried the weight of abandonment and inequality. I would wake up with my heart racing, feeling like the day had already started wrong. Anxiety was constant, and sleepless nights became routine. My stomach ached, my head throbbed, and I felt exhausted before even getting out of bed. All of this affected my physical and emotional health. Gastritis attacks, insomnia, and intense fatigue were just symptoms of a deeper pain. When I finally began to stabilize my financial life, I realized that it wasn't just money that needed to change, but also my habits and self-care. I was finally able to invest in therapy, learn to organize my routine, and slowly recover my body and mind. Sleeping without fear of tomorrow became a luxury I didn't know I missed so much, but it completely changed the way I dealt with problems. I discovered the value of self-care and self-care, something no one in my family had taught me. Therapy made me understand something crucial. I wasn't the problem. I grew up believing everything was my fault, that my difficult life was the result of some personal flaw. But favoritism and inequality within the family are destructive, not only for those who earn less, but also for those who earn more without accountability. My brothers learned this painfully after they lost the flow of easy money, and I had to be ready to help them. The anger I felt began to transform into productive energy. Instead of consuming me, I used my experiences to shape my choices, becoming stronger and more aware. I learned that every mistake I made was part of the learning process, and that accepting my vulnerabilities was the path to emotional maturity. It wasn't easy choosing not to hold a grudge. I often wanted to show my brothers that I had overcome on my own, to display my achievements as if they were war medals. But I realized that proving anything to them wouldn't change anything. The only way to live fully was to focus on my own journey. I learned that my happiness doesn't depend on their recognition. Every victory, no matter how small, was mine, and no one could take it away. This shift in perspective gave me freedom and peace, something no amount of money or approval could buy. I realized that true overcoming comes from within, from self-respect and the strength to keep going, even when no one believes in you. Today, my relationship with my siblings is possible but different. We talk, we share experiences, and they occasionally ask me for financial advice. Sometimes I give it, other times I tell them they need to learn for themselves. I learned that love also means setting boundaries and not giving in whenever they want help. This was one of the hardest lessons of adulthood. Understanding that I can't fix everything and that responsibility isn't something you can teach without effort. Teaching people how to get by is more valuable than simply handing over money. This approach completely changed the family dynamic and made me realize that overcoming obstacles isn't just about me, but about breaking cycles of dependence and injustice. If you reading this feel invisible or underestimated, know that your pain is real and valid. Don't let anyone minimize what you feel, but don't define yourself solely by it either. It's possible to build your life, even starting from scratch. Even carrying deep wounds, every small step is a victory. Every achievement, no matter how small, is a sign of growth. The journey is painful, yes, but with each challenge overcome, you move closer to autonomy, dignity, and inner peace. I am living proof that it's possible to rise up even when all seems lost, even when no one believes. Many people ask me if I've managed to forgive my parents. The answer is complex, in parts. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. I remember every abandonment, every injustice, every silent tear, but I chose not to carry it as a weight that paralyzes me. I forgave to free myself, not to absolve them. Today, my father says he's proud of me, and that still brings a lump to my throat. Not because I need that approval, but because I know how much it cost us to get here. This belated recognition doesn't erase the pain, but it serves as a marker that changes, even small ones, are possible. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire journey is that we can't control how others treat us, but we can choose how we react. I could have used all the pain, abandonment, and inequality to destroy myself, and I almost did. But I decided to use it all as fuel to build something of my own. Not perfect, not ideal, but mine. This daily choice to face each challenge, to not allow resentment to consume me, became my true victory. Today, I understand that overcoming isn't about erasing wounds, but about continuing to walk with them, learning and growing with each experience. When I think about the future, I don't dream of wealth or status. My goal is something deeper, a balanced life with autonomy, dignity, and relationships based on respect and effort. I want that, if I have children, none of them feel invisible or less loved. I want them to understand the value of fighting, building, and respecting themselves, regardless of what others may offer. This is the way I've found to break cycles of injustice and favoritism, to create a life I can call my own, with pride and without regrets. I write all this because I know what it's like to feel alone and undervalued. Perhaps if someone had told me back then that it was possible, the pain would have been more bearable. So, if you're reading this and feel like no one appreciates your efforts, take this. You are not defined by what others did or didn't do. You are defined by the choices you make for yourself, by the actions you take to get back up and keep going. Overcoming obstacles exists and is possible, even when it seems impossible. Every step you take matters. Every achievement you achieve is a milestone of resilience and courage. I still have bad days, moments of insecurity and painful memories, but I know I can face them because I've survived much more than I ever imagined. If I could transform years of abandonment, inequality, and pain into strength, so can you. Life may be unfair, but it can't define who you are. Don't wait for someone to save you. Save yourself. One step at a time, with courage, persistence, and self-love. This is the story of how I stopped being the forgotten child and became the master of my life.